You know how it is. You're just swamped with information, right? Everyone seems to have their secret formula, and you just want the real deal.
Yeah, the core insights.
Exactly. The stuff that actually sticks, those aha moments that, genuinely shift your understanding without feeling like you've just decoded some alien language.
Well, that's exactly what we try to do here on the Deep Dive. We take a source someone listening is curious about, and we pull out the essential knowledge.
As stuff that truly matters.
Right. In a way that's hopefully both thorough and, well, engaging. Think of it as your shortcut to being pretty well informed on something specific.
And today, we are diving headfirst into W.D. Wattles' The Science of Getting Rich. This is based on that YouTube audiobook transcript one of you shared with us.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission is pretty straightforward. Pinpoint the most powerful ideas in Wattles' work, really zeroing in on the practical principles for, well, building wealth.
And it's really key right from the start to remember what Wattles was aiming for.
Okay.
This isn't some, abstract philosophy textbook. It's meant as a practical guide for getting results.
He wants you to do something with it.
Exactly. He even says, look, you might need to initially accept his core statements as just true. Kind of like how an inventor expects you to trust the basic laws of physics they're working with.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. It sounds like Wattles was really speaking to a very specific need. People who were maybe looking for financial improvement and wanted it, like, now.
Precisely. His introduction makes it super clear. This book is for those whose main thing is getting money.
Right.
They want to get rich first
Yeah.
and maybe philosophize about it all later.
Get the cash, then figure out the meaning of life.
Sort of, yeah. His goal was just to provide actionable conclusions based on his understanding without these long, drawn-out justifications for every single step.
But for those listeners who are curious about the why behind it all, he does touch on some philosophical stuff, right? Like this monistic theory of the universe. What's that about?
Yeah, he does offer a little something there. It's about giving a kind of foundational perspective.
Okay.
For anyone seeking a logical basis for the faith he asks for later, Wattles points to this idea that one is all and that all is one.
Okay, so everything is connected.
Basically, yeah. Think of it as a fundamental unity beneath all the, apparent diversity in the universe. One single substance showing up in countless forms.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't even his original idea. It has roots way back in Hindu philosophy and definitely influenced major Western thinkers. He mentions Emerson, for instance.
Right.
It's less about needing to become a philosophy expert and more about just grasping this concept, this idea of an interconnected reality where maybe your thoughts have more influence than you typically assume.
So if you're wondering where these ideas come from, he actually points you to other sources.
He does, yeah. For people wanting to dig into the philosophical background, he recommends looking at Hegel and Emerson. He even mentions a specific pamphlet, get this, called The Eternal News by J.J. Brown. And he includes the address in Glasgow, Scotland, where you could apparently order it back in 1909.
Wow, that's specific. Shows he wanted people to follow up if they were keen.
Definitely. It shows he wasn't just pulling ideas out of thin air, or at least he wanted to show his work for those interested.
And it's interesting he was writing about similar things himself around that time, too, in Nautilus magazine.
Yes, exactly. His series, What is Truth, ran in 1909. But for this book, The Science of Getting Rich, his main priority was always clarity, simplicity.
Make it easy to grasp.
Right. He wanted anyone, literally anyone, to be able to understand his method and, crucially, test it out in their own life. He seemed really confident that the method itself, when you actually did it, would be its own proof.
Okay, so Waddle sets up this idea of a fundamental, unified thinking substance, and from there he jumps to a really direct, maybe even kind of controversial point, the inherent right to be rich.
Absolutely. Chapter 1 is titled exactly that.
No beating around the bush.
Not at all. Wattles makes this really strong case that a truly full, successful life actually requires wealth.
Requires it, not just is helped by it.
Requires it, according to him. He argues that without enough money to get the things you need, you just can't fully develop your talents, or your soul, even. Development, he says, requires the use of things, and things cost money.
He really doesn't hold back, does he? He even says being satisfied with less than you could have is sinful. That's
Yeah.
a strong word.
It is strong. His logic, though, is that the fundamental purpose of nature itself is continuous growth, expansion of life.
Okay.
Therefore, everyone should have access to everything that contributes to a life that's powerful, elegant, beautiful, rich, all of it.
So settling for less is Unnatural.
In his view, yes. It's
Yeah.
going against this basic life drive. A rich person, for Wattles, is simply someone who has everything they need to live completely. And he's adamant that plenty of money is crucial for that.
And this desire we all have, to become the best version of ourselves, to achieve things, he sees that as totally natural, a core part of being human.
Exactly. He calls it an inherent desire. And success, for Wattles, isn't some vague concept. It's becoming who you want to be, realizing your potential.
Right.
And that process, he argues, inevitably involves using things, which means you need the money to buy them. So understanding how to get rich becomes like a fundamental piece of knowledge. It's not optional if you want that full life.
So in Wattles' view, wanting to be wealthy isn't about greed, necessarily. It's tied to this deeper human drive for growth, for a more fulfilling existence.
Precisely. He completely reframes it. The desire for riches is really a desire for a more abundant life in every way, physically, mentally, spiritually. And he considers that desire praiseworthy.
Praiseworthy.
In fact, he goes further and suggests that lacking this desire for more life or fuller expression is actually abnormal, unnatural.
Wow. Okay. He then breaks life down into, 3 areas? Body, mind, and soul, and argues that fulfillment in all 3 needs resources.
Yes. And he stresses they're all equally important. None is holier or better than the others. You need a complete life in all 3 areas.
So what does that look like?
Well, for the body, good food, clothing, shelter, enough rest, recreation, freedom from, soul-crushing excessive toil.
Yeah.
For the mind, access to books, time to study, travel, opportunities for observation, intellectual companionship, art, beauty.
And the soul?
For the soul, he focuses on love. And he believes love finds its fullest expression through giving, through bestowing benefits on others.
And he argues that poverty actually stops us from doing that, from expressing love fully and developing our soul.
Exactly his point. Wattles believes our greatest happiness comes from contributing to the well-being of people we care about. Poverty severely limits our ability to do that in material ways.
Makes sense.
So he concludes, look, using material things allows us to live fully embodied, develop our mind, and unfold our soul. Therefore, getting rich isn't just okay, it's supremely important. A noble study, even.
A noble study.
And neglecting it, he calls that a dereliction of duty to yourself, to God or a higher power, and to humanity.
That's quite a perspective. This all leads then to his big claim. Getting rich isn't luck. It follows specific learnable rules, a science.
Yes, Chapter 2 dives right in. He asserts, flat out, there is a science of getting rich. And it's as precise, he says, as algebra or arithmetic.
Like 2 + 2 = 4, follow the steps, get rich.
That's the claim. He says if you understand and apply these specific laws, anyone can become rich with, quote, mathematical certainty.
Okay, that's a very bold assertion. What's his evidence or reasoning for that?
Well, he argues that owning money and property is always the result of doing things in a certain way, whether people do it intentionally or just stumble upon it accidentally.
That certain way. Okay, we'll need to define that.
Absolutely. But his initial point is observational. He says, look around.
Yeah.
You see rich people and poor people living in the same town, sometimes working in the same industries.
Right.
If external factors like environment were the main thing, you'd expect more uniform results in those shared situations. But you don't see that.
So it's not just location or your job type. He also dismisses things like, say, exceptional talent or just working harder than everyone else.
Correct. He explicitly points out that many highly talented people stay poor, while others, with seemingly average abilities, get rich.
We've all seen examples of that.
Right. And he notes that just being super frugal doesn't guarantee wealth either. Sometimes free spenders accumulate more. And again, people in the same business doing very similar tasks often end up with vastly different bank accounts.
So all these common explanations, he says they're not the root cause.
Exactly. These observations lead him to believe there must be a specific method behind it. This certain way of doing things is the real key.
And this certain way, he thinks anyone can learn it. It's not some secret handshake for the elite.
Absolutely not. He emphasizes it doesn't require genius-level intellect or special innate gifts. He states pretty clearly that anyone smart enough to read and understand his book can learn this method. Now, he does acknowledge that, sure, location matters to some extent. You need to interact with people. And choosing a business you actually like and have some aptitude for, that helps too.
Common sense things.
Right. But he insists the fundamental element, the game changer, is learning and consistently applying this certain way, regardless of your current job, your profession, or even your starting capital.
Wait, even lack of capital. Isn't that usually the biggest hurdle people see?
He addresses that directly. He says getting capital is part of the process of getting rich, using his method. Even the poorest person, he claims, can start getting rich by beginning to do things in this certain way.
Okay, that's a huge claim, which leads naturally into his next point, right? That opportunity isn't actually locked down by the already rich. Chapter 3, I think.
Exactly. He tackles that head on. This idea that all the wealth is cornered, all the good opportunities are gone. He says, nope, not true.
How does he argue against that? Because it can feel that way sometimes.
Sure. He concedes that maybe breaking into some huge established industries might be tough. Like you probably weren't going to easily start a rival railroad company in 1910.
Right.
But he argues new opportunities are constantly emerging. He uses examples from his time like electric railways were just starting, and he predicted aerial transportation was the next big thing.
So look for the new frontiers.
Essentially, yes. Don't just try to compete in saturated markets. Look for developing fields, new needs arising.
And even if you're stuck in say, a factory job, he thinks this certain way can still open doors.
He does. He suggests that by acting in this specific manner, even within constraints, individuals can attract or create new opportunities. He even gives an example of someone leaving factory work to become a farmer, highlighting agriculture as a field ripe with opportunity back then. His core point is that opportunity follows the needs of society as it evolves. It's not static.
He also seems to push back quite strongly against the idea that workers are just inherently kept down by bosses or big corporations, doesn't he?
He does. Now, he acknowledges things like cooperatives, he mentions Belgian ones, so he sees collective action is possible. But his main focus is always on the individual.
Empowering the single person.
Yes. He argues that people are generally in their current circumstances not because they're trapped by external forces primarily, but because they haven't yet learned or applied this certain way. He assures the individual worker listening that they can still ride the tide of opportunity to riches if they learn how.
Oh, okay. And then, maybe surprisingly for some folks, he argues there's actually plenty of wealth to go around. It's not a zero-sum game.
Exactly. Not a limited pie where if I get a slice, you get less. He says the supply of riches is essentially unlimited.
Unlimited? How does he figure that?
Well, first he points to the visible supply. He uses these grand examples, like saying there were enough building materials just in the U.S. back then to build a palace for every family, enough resources to clothe everyone lavishly, feed everyone abundantly.
So physical resources aren't the constraint.
Right. But then he goes deeper. He says the visible supply is huge, but the invisible supply, this is where his core philosophy comes back, and the invisible supply is truly inexhaustible.
This is the original substance or formless stuff again?
That's it. He describes it as the fundamental single substance that everything is made from. It's constantly taking new forms, creating new things.
So it's like the ultimate raw material.
Yes, but more than that, he says the universe wasn't just made once and left alone. This original substance, this formless stuff, it permeates everything, all the spaces in between things. And it's constantly creating...
Like a cosmic factory that never shuts down.
Kind of. Nature, he says, is this inexhaustible storehouse, always producing more. Resources will be replenished or new ones created as needed, because this formless stuff responds to needs. And crucially, he says, it's intelligent, it's thinking stuff, it's alive, and it's inherently driven towards creating more life.
Wow. Okay, so if this infinite intelligent supply exists, why isn't everyone already rich? It comes back to the certain way.
Exactly. That's his consistent answer. He says humanity as a whole is always swimming in abundance. Individual poverty only happens because individuals aren't following this certain way of thinking and acting.
It's about aligning yourself with this flow of abundance.
That's a good way to put it. He reiterates, this formless stuff wants more life, fuller functioning. Nature is designed for the advancement of life. It provides generously. And the resources of this infinite supply are available, he concludes, to anyone who acts and thinks in that certain way.
Which brings us, I think, to Chapter 4, and what seems like the absolute bedrock of his whole system, the power of thought itself.
Yes, this is really the engine driving the whole process in his view. Wattles declares quite starkly that thought is the only power that can produce tangible riches from this formless substance, from the thinking stuff.
Only thought.
The sole power, he says. His proposition is that a thought, a mental image of a specific form, when held within this substance, will actually cause that form to be created.
So, thinking about a house in the right way impresses that idea onto the substance, which then starts to form it.
That's the essence of it. He draws a parallel with nature itself. He suggests that the formless stuff, This original substance moves according to its thoughts. All the forms and processes we see, planets forming, trees growing, are visible expressions of thoughts within this substance.
Like the universe is thinking itself into existence.
In a way, yeah. The thought of a planetary system leads to planets. The thought of an oak tree starts the process of growth. It takes the form of his thought and moves accordingly.
Okay. And then he makes this really critical distinction about humans, doesn't he? About how we've mostly used thought so far.
Yes, this is key. He says, look, humans are thinking centers. We can have original thought. Everything humans make, physically, starts as a thought in someone's mind.
Sure, an architect thinks of a building first.
Right. But, Wattles argues, so far, humanity has mostly used thought to direct manual labor to modify existing forms. We shape wood, we mine metal. We haven't really focused on impressing our thoughts directly onto the formless substance to cause the creation of new forms from scratch.
So we're working with finished products, not the raw thinking clay itself.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. He proposes that we can actually create directly from this formless substance simply by communicating our thoughts to it.
That's a massive leap. How does he justify that? This leads to his fundamental propositions, right?
Exactly. He boils it down to 3 core statements you just have to accept, initially at least.
Okay, what are they?
First, there is one original, formless stuff or substance, the source of everything. All the different elements and materials we see are just different appearances of this one stuff.
Okay, the unity idea again, one substance.
Second, this stuff is thinking stuff. A thought held in it produces the form of the thought. Thinking about something in this substance creates the shape of that thing.
Thought produces form, got it.
And third, man, or humans, as thinking centers capable of original thought, can cause the creation or formation of whatever they think about by communicating that thought to this original thinking substance.
So humans can tap into this creative process directly with their minds.
That's the core belief. Let me summarize his summary. There's a thinking stuff filling the universe. A thought in this stuff produces the thing imagined. Humans can form thoughts and, by impressing them on this substance, cause the thing they think about to be created.
Simple statements, but huge implications.
Absolutely. And Wattles claims these statements can be proven by logic and experience. You can reason backwards from what we observe, or reason forwards from the nature of thinking substance and then test it through action.
And his ultimate proof, again, is just try it. If people who follow the instructions get rich, the theory holds.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He says the theory is true until someone follows the instructions exactly and fails, which, he adds, he believes is impossible.
Wow. Confidence.
Total confidence. So this brings him back to the practical application. Getting rich requires thinking in a certain way, because our actions always stem from how we think.
And this certain way of thinking, it involves focusing on what you want, the truth of abundance, he calls it, regardless of what things look like right now.
Precisely. That's a crucial part. Thinking what you want to be true is thinking truth, he says, no matter what appearances might suggest poverty, lack, or limitation.
Sounds hard.
He admits it. He says everyone has the natural power to think what they want, but it takes way more effort than just thinking according to appearances. The visible world constantly bombards us with thoughts of limitation, right? Resisting that takes work.
Sustained, focused thought.
He calls it the hardest work there is, especially when appearances are negative. If you're sick, holding the thought of health requires effort. If you're poor, holding the thought of abundance against all evidence takes real mental muscle.
But acquiring this power, this mental muscle, that's the key.
That's what makes you a mastermind, in his words. Someone who can conquer fate, overcome circumstances. And this power comes directly from grasping that basic fact. One thinking substance creates everything.
And because every thought held in it becomes form.
And because you can impress your thoughts upon it.
Then you realize you can create what you want to create. It eliminates doubt and fear, ideally.
That's the goal. Which is why, he says, the very first step to getting rich, using his science, is simply to believe those 3 fundamental statements we just outlined.
You believe them absolutely.
Yes. He's really emphatic about this. He says you must lay aside all other conflicting ideas about how the universe works. You have to dwell on this monistic view, this one substance idea, until it's fixed in your mind, until it becomes your habitual way of thinking.
He even suggests rereading those statements over and over.
Yeah, read them every day, meditate on them, fix them in memory, and, crucially, reject all doubt.
He calls doubt a sin. That's strong language again.
It is. He basically says entertaining doubt is counterproductive to the process. He advises you to actively avoid anything that contradicts this core belief. Don't listen to arguments against it. Don't read books or articles promoting a different view. Don't even entertain conflicting ideas from, say, sermons or lectures that might suggest limitation or scarcity as fundamental realities.
So seal yourself off from contradictory input.
While you're establishing this new belief system, yes. He warns that wavering, trying to mix different philosophies, will just lead to failure. His instruction is blunt. Don't ask why these things are true. Don't try to figure out the how at this stage. Just accept them on trust.
Take it as a working hypothesis.
Essentially, yes. A foundational belief you accept absolutely to begin the process. The science of getting rich, he concludes, begins with this absolute acceptance of these principles.
Okay, so let's just recap where we've gotten in this first part of our dive. Wiles presents this very practical path to wealth, but it's grounded in a specific, maybe unusual philosophical idea, this unified, intelligent substance.
Right, the formless stuff.
He then asserts our inherent right to be rich, seeing it as essential for full human development, body, mind, and soul.
Yeah, not just a desire, but a right tied to our purpose.
And he argues that getting rich isn't luck or talent alone, but an exact science, following a certain way.
A predictable process, like math.
And opportunity isn't limited. The universe, or this formless stuff, is inherently abundant and creative.
Always producing more, always offering possibilities.
And the absolute foundation, the first principle, is thought. The power of your mind to impress ideas onto this substance and cause creation, with the crucial first step being unwavering belief in these core ideas.
That's an excellent summary.
Yeah.
He's basically asking you, the listener, to fundamentally shift your paradigm,
Right.
to adopt a new core understanding of reality and your place within it, your creative capacity.
And in our next deep dive, we're going to get into the how. How does this foundational belief translate into, actual steps? We'll explore the importance of gratitude, the specifics of this certain way of thinking and acting, and the role your will plays in all this.
Exactly. We'll move from the what and why to the practical how-to. How do you actually engage this thought power? How do you align yourself with this thinking stuff to, as he puts it, bring about the increase you desire?
So for now, maybe something for you to mull over. If you really truly embrace this idea, just hypothetically, that the universe is permeated by an intelligent substance that responds directly to your focused thoughts, how might that fundamentally change the way you look at your current situation, your opportunities, your potential to create wealth?
Yeah, it's really an invitation, isn't it, to reconsider your own power, your own agency in shaping your experience. What would it mean if there really was an inexhaustible source of creation that's responsive to your mental focus?
A pretty powerful idea to sit with. Thanks for joining us for this part of the deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time as we continue unpacking W.D. Waddell's The Science of Getting Rich.